If you love my barely prepared content here, then you'll love my completely unprepared content on my streaming channel, which is youtube.com/grimstreams, which is pretty easy to remember. Hello lovelies, a few people asked for some more information and preview on Wightchester, so who am I to pass up an opportunity to shill the stuff I've made? So again, Wightchester is my most recent release. It's a monster of a book, weighing in at 500 pages. It's a city crawl in a city that has been overrun by the undead in an alternate 17th century, and the city has been turned into a prison. So while it teems with the undead, people have decided that that seems like a brilliant place to send prisoners, because it's far more expensive and logistically difficult to ship them to the Americas or wherever else Britain has had prison colonies in the past. So the vast and overwhelming majority of the book details the background of the city and its contents in painstaking detail, and in a way that you are supposed to add notes in the book, tick things off, stick in post-it notes. It's meant to be a book that you directly use and manipulate and make notes in and highlight and all the rest of it, which is why it's not hardback, which some people were asking about. Also, a hardback of this size would be prohibitively expensive, both to purchase and to ship. I know some people prefer hardback, but for a book that's meant to be used thoroughly and messed up, it just didn't seem like a great idea. But if there's enough of a clamour for it, maybe I'll do a special hardback edition or something. Alright, so rather than the rest of the book, I want to take you through the appendices, which is what people were interested in. Well, people were interested in the monsters, but it's an opportunity to go through the appendices. So the appendices offer you a bit more in-depth information about the world, about the time. You can think of it as like a kind of social history version of that Lamentations, but with all the floor plans in it, which you will also find useful using alongside this, by the way. So we have information on the households, what you could expect from lower class houses, middle class houses, upper class houses, the prevalence of servants, what kind of servants you could expect. Now, a lot of this is cribbed from Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year, wherein he describes his household and so on in great detail, but that's a sort of upper middle class to upper class household. But it gives you some idea. We're fortunate that we've got such sources. Appendix 2 is the rules for creating grimdark style Wightchester appropriate characters in the game Mork Borg. So you will find information here and some of the illustrations similar to or directly the same as those in Grimdark, but creating characters that are a little less esoteric perhaps than those that you would normally find in Mork Borg. So if you like the darkness and the fragility of characters in Mork Borg, but you wish the character types weren't necessarily as peculiar, you might find this useful more generally, but it's also specifically very useful, very good for Wightchester adventures. And these are all actually properly playtested, which is difficult on an indie budget, but there we go. Then we have various miscellaneous references, so re-reference the firearms rules, which are also earlier in the book for easier reference there, the kinds of foods and things that were available at the time, the types of coinage, so you can choose whether to go with normal sort of D&D or Lamentations gold and silver or authentic coinage from the time, and there are conversion rates to D&D type money. It's not as difficult as you think it might be to get your head around old British coinage, even though it's non-decimal. We have guides to weights and measures. While Britain and the US both still occasionally use imperial type measures rather than metric, A lot of old measurements are a bit difficult to get your head around, but it does add a lot of flavour and colour to descriptions and other things that you might do during play. For example, musketeers carried 12 preloaded, shots where you'd have the ball, the wadding, and the powder. Because they carried 12 of them, they were called the 12 Apostles. So that kind of thing about the numbers and so on. It carries a lot of character and so on with it as well. Being weird and making no sense, you have special measurements for wine, different ones for ale and beer, and for other general liquids and so on. So yeah, old school measurements are a little bit weird. The next appendix covers some rules that you could use, rather than just being arbitrary, for what attracts more dead to where you are. The sounds that you make, the noise being seen and so on, and how often wandering zombies should show up and spoil everyone's fun. Speaking of that, we have random tables to determine random zombie encounters whenever you want to throw them in, or when the book suggests that you do, and zombies brought in by the contributors. Though some people decided to be a little bit different, a little bit difficult, and had non-zombies elsewhere in the city, which you'll encounter but will be none the wiser that someone paid to have that put there. Also searching rules for what you might find on particular zombies. Then we have the bestiary, which is what people were particularly interested in. There are shortened stat blocks for some things. There are rules for very quick NPCs, so you can just very, very quickly, 30 seconds or so, throw in a generic NPC for someone that they might run into. Doesn't work so well for monsters, but you could use it for monsters of a lower level. But it's a highly compressed stat block, almost down to the size of old school D&D, and generally that's enough information, I've found. So you may find that more broadly useful. Rules for the plague that's brought around by the comet. Though I read that they're about to change the exhaustion rules massively in 1 D&D, so I'm not sure about the compatibility. Hopefully it'll be okay. Then we get into the creatures themselves, and there's a lot of them, and it's not just zombies. But I think the thing that's going to interest people the most is probably the zombies. But there are also mutated creatures, ghosts brought about by the trauma of the fall of the city, strange mutations, all kinds of weirdness. And all of this is brought about by the fragments of the comet. But it's not as simple as the kind of warp stone that you might find in Mordheim for Warhammer. It's in some ways closer to the colour out of space. Now I leave the comet pretty vague, so you can interpret it any which way you want. It can just be a weird substance that causes this. I tend to think of it as being more like the colour out of space, in that it's a kind of malevolent, or at least unconcerned, force or intelligence that is experimenting with what's around it by reanimating the dead, by twisting and mutating creatures and putting them together in different ways, almost like a sort of malevolent alien probe that is experimenting with the living creatures and the matter that it finds around it. But there is no definitive answer on what the comet is, so you're free to interpret that in any which way you want. It could be a fallen angel, it could be some weird mutating substance, it could be a malevolent colour from out of the cosmos, it could be whatever you want. But my vague guiding idea was that it was some kind of weirdly intelligent mutating probe that was doing an utterly alien intelligence that was experimenting with whatever it found around itself. But it can also twist time and space and have other peculiar effects. It's carte blanche to be weird and horrific. Now obviously the main kind of foe is going to be the zombies, but there are many varieties of zombies besides the basic. I don't want to spoil a lot of them, but you'll find a lot of location and theme specific or appropriate undead around. You'll find ones that have been preserved or stitched back together or combined with other things, or ones that have been in circumstances that have made them peculiar, like a fire that caused their bodies to fuse together. Ones that are more rotted, less rotted, ones that starve to death, so they're these thin, lean, fast-moving, skeletal zombies. There's a huge variety, and the idea there is to stop people getting too complacent. It's kind of like you had themed zombies in The Walking Dead, because otherwise they just kind of faded into the background and became an environmental hazard rather than something more interesting. And so you'll find a wide variety of zombies, thematically appropriate to various locations, but there's nothing to stop them wandering off. Some retain a certain amount of intelligence, others are changed by what you find around them, some are infested. So just to give you one example of one of these specialised zombie types, there are corpses that have been infested with bees. Now there are genuinely bees that feed on carrion, so you can imagine a zombie getting infested with a queen bee and them feasting on the sweet rotting flesh around them and building their hive into the body cavities as the organs rot out. Feeding on the other bodies around it so that they don't completely destroy their home, and then you come up and you whack this thing and that makes the bees very, very angry indeed. So there are genuinely bees that do that feast on corpses, and apparently they produce a black honey, but I wouldn't eat it if I were you. There are also things made by the survivors that you'll run into and that you'll find, and the fragments of the comet themselves tend to grow wherever they fall, and thereby to have an increased effect over time. The plants are also affected, the animals are also affected. What few animals there are, obviously survivors will be hunting whatever animals they can find within the city. And the idea of a closed off place is appealing to monsters that may have existed outside of the city. If you don't want to be captured and burnt at the stake or decapitated and buried at crossroads, then a city full of undead is actually quite an appealing place to go, isn't it? So yeah, you'll find a whole ton of stuff that you can easily import to your other grim and dark games in your own settings or wherever else. Everything is statted for standard 5e, grimdark, Lamentations and Mork Borg, so that covers your OSR as well. It also means that it would be relatively easy for me to do conversions of the monsters, at least for even more systems down the line, and to release those as add-on books for people to use their preferred system to play through. Maybe like Against the Dark Master or Open BRP, or someone mentioned Dungeon Crawl Classics might be one to do it for. I'm not familiar enough with that system though, obviously. You also find plenty of other survivors, humans, people who may not be quite so friendly. There isn't a lot of drawings here, and that's the same thing throughout the whole book, but that's purely to do with space. It was more important to get the descriptions in, to get all the creatures in, and to stay, within my stated page count. We've also got rules for the things that are truly dangerous zombie mobs. So these are like swarms, but of the dead, and it's when enough zombies congregate and come together that they become truly dangerous, where they can really demolish things and move through buildings and cause severe problems even for higher level parties. Obviously, if you're playing straight D&D, you'll want to keep the level low and slow down the advanced and experience points, but for Grimdark and everything else, you know, these kind of things ensure that the dead do remain a genuine threat. There's a heartfelt letter from me at the end, a full and proper index, and there you go. Now, I'm not sure how active I'm going to be on YouTube or wherever else. With dramatically appropriate timing, I had to go back into hospital for a checkup and had massively high blood pressure, same as I did at the start of this project. So I'm kind of on enforced rest, but there's a certain poetry to the mirroring that I find appealing. Still, there you go. If you got more questions or anything, maybe I'll do a live stream at some point when I'm feeling a bit better. To do promotion, kind of belated launch party or something. Please share the shit out of Wightchester wherever you find it, wherever you've bought it, and when you get your copies, I hope you enjoy them. Sang.